Good morning everybody, and welcome to another live online bushcraft session. Well, beautiful day here in Cheshire, so we're really lucky. I wasn't sure if we'd be able to get out and do something in the garden, but here we are. It's a beautiful day and it's great. So welcome. We'll just do the usual situation for the first 4 or 5 minutes. We'll just let some people filter in and I'll do a few shout outs. Then we'll get into the bulk of the lesson. And then we'll do some more shout outs at the end. So I see a few of the usual suspects appearing this morning. Tristina McFina, hello everyone, hi to you, I recognise that name by now. Good morning all from Jez Knowles, hello to you. Hi again from the GH boys, hi to you. Good morning from Ben. Hi Ben, how are you? Hope you're well. And yeah, so this morning's session, last Monday was my turn, and I did a nature walk, which I really enjoyed. We had a lot of snow and we looked at badger tracks and we did lots of things. I thought this week we'd just mix it up again, we'll do something a bit different and we'll do another craft. So this morning I'm going to show you how to make bushcraft tongs, which is a little project that I often do sitting around the campfire. I've made many sets of these over the years. Theo Newark here, how are you doing? Nice to see you. Morning from 7-year-old Life in Aberdeenshire. Well, I got your name right that time. You schooled me last time on how to pronounce your name. So in brackets Life, nice and clear for me. So thanks very much. Excited for another outdoor cooking session. Well, not strictly cooking, although I might do a little bit of cooking, but it'll be fun nonetheless. Morning from Carl Marshall in Oban. Wow, a lot of Scottish fraternity are turning out in droves this morning. That's good to see. And good morning from Ruby, Alfie and Seb in South Wales. Hi to you, hope you guys are all well and safe in the middle of this lockdown that continues. Yeah, so what we're going to actually make this morning, I've put an elastic band around these because I made these just before we started, but just if you're just tuning in, we're going to make these. And these are just really simple pair of bushcraft tongs. And again, these are things that these type of tongs I've made many times over the years around the campfire because they're really quick and easy to do if you just need a pair of tongs to do some cooking. But the nice thing about doing these is I can teach you how to steam bend a piece of wood, and we can talk a little bit about how you actually use the heat of the fire to shape wood in different ways, and that's a really neat little trick. So yeah, a few more people joining in. As usual, I've got my capable assistant, beautiful assistant. I get in trouble every time I say capable, behind the camera. Because years of teaching, I usually say my capable assistant because they're not my partner, but in this case she is, so I should probably change my spiel. And yeah, well done to Ed. So Ed's doing 2 sessions a week and I'm doing 1 session a week. So I'm taking the Mondays, he did Wednesday and Friday last week. So if you haven't watched those, Ed did some really good sessions on fire, hand drill, neat little technique that he tried for the first time called the log roll, I think it's called. It's not something I'm familiar with, but yeah, he did that. Yeah, so I think we'll get started. So what I'll do is, as I say, I'll take some questions as we go along, and Hannah is behind the camera there. She's going to read out any questions and give them to me because it's kind of difficult for me to do the project at the same time as actually read the questions, and I'm going to be using a knife, so that's important. So these little tongs, these are great. So like I say, these are the types of things, sitting around campfires and you need something to be able to turn your sausages or move your burgers or turn your bread over, whatever you need to do. You can just make a pair of these and it's really simple. And so what I asked you to get is a piece of green wood. Now remember, you don't have to do this as I'm talking. You can always watch this back at any time and you'll be able to make these in your own time. So what I've got here is a piece of willow that I collected, and it's about 2 foot long. It's about a metre, this one's quite long actually. And it's about 15 millimetres wide, and it's nice and straight, and there aren't any side branches in it. And what I'm going to do is this section in the middle, I'm going to thin it down a little bit, and then I'm going to heat it up so that I can bend it. So it's going to end up looking a bit like that. And I'm going to thin it down because it's going to make it easier to bend, but I don't want to make it so thin that it snaps. But that's quite a key part of the process. Now if I just took this piece of willow here and I tried to bend it, because it's willow it's quite flexible and it probably will bend and I probably will to get it, but because that's a very tight curve, I'm going to need to use heat to help me bend it. And so what you can do, wood is a fascinating material. If you imagine, here's a little bit of the science lesson. So wood is lots of little fibres running up and down. If you just imagine lots of little tubes, and they're called the fibres, and all those fibres are held together by this stuff we call lignin. Now lignin's quite fascinating. And what happens when you take a piece of wood and you heat it up over the fire is that lignin, that stuff that holds the fibres together, it gets soft and it gets flexible and it kind of relaxes. And what happens is, when that happens, when I use the heat, I can bend this piece of wood, and then when it cools, the fascinating thing is that lignin will actually rejoin. It will reset in the position, in the new position that you tell it to. So wood is quite malleable. It's an amazing thing. You can actually use the heat to change the shape of the wood and keep all the strength. So that's the little science lesson for you this morning. So that's what I'm going to attempt to do. Now this piece of willow has actually been sitting out overnight in the garden. It's frozen, so I can feel it's very, very cold. So it really wouldn't want to bend very well. It would probably break if I tried to do it. So what I'm going to do is, you can see my stick has it's not perfectly straight, it has a slightly natural curve in the middle. And that's the part obviously I want to do the bending. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my knife and I'm going to thin this central part down, probably by about half. Now, usual caveats with using any cutting tools or any knives, make sure you have a first aid kit. I've always got this handy whenever I'm using a knife. Now these lessons are also aimed at children, and so it's important that whenever children are using a knife that they're getting adult supervision. So please remember that with good supervision and following the little steps that I give you here, you should be nice and safe. And remember that I don't want to repeat myself on all these videos, but I've done a lot of little videos on Instagram and in these previous forest skills session where I talk a little bit about what kind of knife is suitable for this kind of work. So don't just grab a kitchen knife out of your drawer. It's probably not going to be suitable for doing any carving of wood. What you need is a knife that's specifically designed for bushcraft. And again, I've done lots of videos on that. And you'll see it has a blunt tip, which also helps to the safety. Okay, so again, remember working, if I want to carve a piece of wood, working off to the side of my body. Okay, so this knife is in my right hand, and I'm going to be carving off to the right hand side of my body, and that means that the knife travels into space and not into myself or into somebody else. So it's nice and safe. Keep your thumb off the back of the blade, remember, because that's just going to get you a blister, the length of your thumb. Okay, so again, working off to the side, and I hope you can see this. I'm just going to take the middle of the piece of wood and I'm just going to start shaving it down. What you might call the belly of the piece of wood. This might be called the back. If you remember my bow making session that I did a couple of weeks back, I talked about the belly, which is the bit that faces towards you on the bow, and I talked about the back. So what I'm going to do is shave down the belly of this, and I'm going to work from one side, and then I'm going to come round and I'm going to work from the other side. And I just need to work off, again, off to the side of my body. Just to recap, you know, we never work with our knives in between our legs here, because this is a real danger area. We're working inside our body. If you are going to work in front of yourself, just make sure that your elbows are on your knees, and then again the knife is out into space. And don't cross over and work on the wrong side of your body. Okay, so always working off to the side. And I'm just going to thin this piece of wood down by about half. And you'll notice that I come from both sides. What you can't do, now that I've shaped this a little bit, what you can't do with a knife, if I show you this, I don't know if you can see this on the camera, you can't carve down into the wood fibres, carve all the way along and then try to come back out of the wood again. Because what will happen is you'll carve down into the grain all the way along, and then you'll get stuck in the end grain here, and that piece there will want to rip off. And we don't want that to happen, so we always carve downhill. So you can see that clearly here. You carve down along with the grain, get to about the middle, and then I turn the stick around, and then I'll carve downhill again into the middle and I meet it. So I'm always moving the piece of wood around the knife. I'm not moving the knife around the piece of wood. So just chip away at that. Okay, so I'm going to thin it down till it's, like I say, about half the thickness. And I want it to be nice and uniform. You can see when I start to bend that, you'll see that it's not got too many thick sections. I don't want a really thick part here and a really thin part here, because when I try to bend this, wherever it's thin will be a weak point and it'll probably snap. It's very cold on my hands, this piece of wood, because it's frozen. And again, the usual questions I get asked with things like, why would you use a piece of green wood to do this? Why wouldn't you pick up a piece of dead wood from the wood pile or lying around the forest floor? Well, you won't be able to bend a piece of dead wood because there's no water in it. And that piece of wood is dried and it's already taken its shape. The only way to bend a piece of dead wood is to soak it again, and you don't really want to do that. It's going to take too much time. But a piece of green wood has moisture in it and it will work perfectly well for bending and steaming. Okay, so now I've thinned it down in the middle by about, I'm going to say about 7 or 8 inches. Just enough so that I get a nice even bend when I bend this piece of willow. Again, nothing fancy with my carving techniques. I'm just working off to the side of my body, off into space. Okay, when I'm happy that that's nice and thin, or well, not so much nice and thin, but when I'm happy with that's nice and uniform, like so, I'm going to start to apply a little bit of heat. So here's the fun part. So you can see I can already bend this quite a lot because it's willow and it's green and it's starting to warm up. It's not frozen anymore. But when I apply this heat, like I explained in the introduction, if you missed that, what's going to happen is when I heat this piece of wood up on the fire, and I'll start doing it now, all the glue, the lignin, the material which holds the fibres of the wood together, they're going to start to relax. And when they relax, that means that they're going to allow me to bend this piece of wood. I'm just going to be really gentle with it, so I just heat it up a little bit at a time. So I hold it over the fire. If you've got a very short piece of wood or you've got a very hot fire, it might be a good idea to wear gloves at this point. You can see with a little bit of heat, I'm starting to bend that. Now I wouldn't be able to bend that so easily if I hadn't heated it up. And this steam bending process that I'm doing, it's going to take, you want to take your time with it, there's no rush. It's going to take me probably 5 minutes to just coax this piece of wood round into the shape. You can see I'm getting a nice even bend. At this point, you can see I've got a little bit of a thin area here which is bending a little bit more than the rest, and you might feel that it's necessary to just take a little bit of material off anywhere where it's a little bit thick and it's not bending. So remember, you can always take the knife back to the piece of wood, thin it down a little bit more, and then start to bend it. But I'm quite happy with how this looks. And this process of steam bending I use for all kinds of things. I make traditional wooden canvas canoes, and that's a big 18-foot canoe made of cedar. And there's about 50 ribs in the canoe which sort of hold the frame together and make the whole thing solid, and each one of those needs to be steamed. So that's probably one of the most common uses I have for steam bending wood. And they make, you know, the ribs take quite a bit of time. You steam them for about an hour because they're much thicker than this. And once they set, that's what gives the canoe its shape. But other things I'll steam bend, I'll do things like, sometimes when you make big bows and arrows, the tips of the bow, you can steam bend them to give you a little bit more shape to the tip of the bow, and that might be another reason why I might steam bend something. Now this wood is hot to touch. Now my hands are quite used to working with hot timber, so I'm just going to get in there, but again, using gloves would be a sensible idea. Sometimes if the wood's not too hot, you can sort of bend it over your knee a little bit, and your knee's a nice rounded shape that allows you to actually bend this piece of wood. Now I wouldn't want this to take too much longer than 5 minutes because this wood is going to be drying out as I do this, and if it dries out completely then it might want to snap. So I try to work quickly, but I take the time, I give the wood, as I bend it, I make sure I listen to the wood. You know, I listen to parts that want to bend a little bit more, parts that don't want to bend so much, and I just, making something like this is all about feel. It's all about just working it out as you go. Okay, so there we are. I've got my bend. Now I've got a little kink, one little area there, I'm not too worried about that. I've got a pretty nice general little bend, quite similar to the first one I made. And there we have, and you'll see that it wants to spring open. And that's what makes this nice, that's what makes it a pair of tongs, because it's got a natural spring in the wood. So the last thing I want to do is I want to just take my knife and I want to tidy up the ends, because I want them to be flat, because when I want to try and pick something up with these tongs, I want the inner surface to be flat. It's much easier to pick something up. So they're not quite the same length. So at this point, I'll just, again, working safely off to the side of my body, I'm just going to shorten one of the legs. There we are, you can see it wants to open, but that's okay because it's already done its bending, so I can bend it back into shape. There we are, I've made the legs the same length. Then the inside of them, like I say, I'm just going to flatten them off a little bit where they come together. So I've got a nice flat surface. And then I usually take the bark off at the very end, just because I think it looks a little bit nicer. Okay. And there we have it. Nope, these are quite long, these ones. There we have, I've got a pair of Bushcraft tongs. And now I can pick stuff up on the fire. And once you do this, I mean, I'm doing this at speed, so these are a little bit rougher than I might take because I'm doing it live, and it's not so easy to do it live with planes going over and all kinds of things. But anyway, even if you wanted something to be able to move logs around in the fire, you can see I can quite easily do that. I can use these to turn food and that kind of thing. And so the pair that I made this morning, they're a little bit shorter, but what I've done, you can see I put an elastic band around them. And I've done that because I want them to just dry into shape, like so. I want them to dry with a little bit of openness. And once these are dry, you'll actually be able to use these for probably a few weeks or even longer, because they'll hold that shape nicely because you've taught the wood to be bent there. And if I take that off, you'll see that they'll still want to spring open. But give them a few days drying in that shape and you'll have a pair of permanent tongs that you'll be able to use around the campfire in the garden or in the woods or whatever else. And that's how you make bushcraft tongs, and that steam bending of the wood is a really neat little skill that you can use for all kinds of things in bushcraft. So, I wonder if we have any questions or comments or shout outs that I could do. Where's my sheath? Always put your knife back in your sheath. Let's see. Oh, we've got, let me see if I can pronounce your name. Reinald's Buds from Latvia. Sorry, I'm probably butchering your name big time, but hi to you, because I know that you're often tuning in from Latvia. And Wild, hi there, hi to you. So yeah, and there we are, hi from Cornwall, Preacher Bear. Nice to meet you. Yeah, we have any bushcraft questions I could answer? Anything at all, you know, about bushcraft, that's no problem. Good morning, Stephen from Moss and Kim, thank you. Oh, you're welcome. There's a little project there. I just thought it's nice because once you've learned how to steam bend a piece of wood, there's all kinds of things you can make. It's a really nice little technique. So unless we have any other questions or comments, yeah, I'll probably just say thanks very much. So remember that Ed is on Wednesday, and not quite sure what he's doing yet because we're both very busy between these lives and family and life, so I haven't actually talked to him yet, but I know that he'll have something exciting planned for Wednesday morning. So remember, Wednesday morning, 10 o'clock, YouTube channel, Online Bushcraft, and yeah, thanks very much for joining me. Oh, question from Sherlock Films. Well, I'll answer that one since you're there just before I sign it. Oh, actually, one more question. Any other utensils / tools? Yeah, we can make all kinds of things. Here's a wooden spatula that I made a few years ago. So I make all kinds of things around the fire. Spatulas, spoons, ladles, bowls. Those little tongs are really just a neat trick that puts an hour in round the campfire. And what's my favourite carving project? It's a good question from Jez Knowles. No, it's not. It's from Sherlock Films. My favourite carving project is probably making a canoe paddle. I'm often asked that. And I like making canoe paddles because they're really quite difficult and they're quite challenging because there's lots of shapes and lots of... I know a paddle just looks like a bit of a blade and a shaft and a handle, but it isn't. There's lots to it. The profile is very important. Where the flex, where it flexes in some parts is really important and doesn't flex in others. So probably carving that's probably my favourite thing to carve. Hello from William in Norfolk. Helen Neve, hi to you. I've been wanting to carve some sporks for hiking. That's next. Yeah, whenever I often teach people how to carve utensils and spoons and that kind of thing, and one of the things people often ask is, can I make a fork? And a spork, for those of you who don't know, is a utensil which has a spoon on one end and a fork on the other. And wooden forks are really challenging to make because if you make them thin enough that you can actually spike a piece of wood, then often the wood can break quite easily. So I tend to find that forks don't last so long in the woods, but they're a fun thing to try and carve because they're very tricky to be able to make the spines of the fork. Interesting, thank you. Well, you're welcome. We'll try this, thanks Max. Yeah, get out and try a bit of steam bending. Let's see. We've only ever made tongs by splitting the wood lengthways and inserting a wedge. Loved your method. Yeah, that's another really neat way that you can do a pair of tongs. And I think what this person here, let me get your name, Kim Craigie, it looks like, is you have a piece of wood like this, or you have a single piece of wood and you make a split down it and you insert a little wedge, and what that does is that wedge holds open the two tongs and you're able to make them. That's a really neat way to do it. But I like this because it's just a little bit of bending around the fire, and it's not as easy as it looks to do that, and you might have to have a few goes before you can actually make a nice round bend. Let's see, and a couple more comments and then I think I will, because I wasn't getting any comments or questions at the end, so I thought I'll sign off, and then all of a sudden I've had an absolute torrent. So let me just, good morning from Japan, just finished my job today, and what a beautiful bushcraft tongs. I will try this as well. Okay, well great, I'm glad to know you're going to get out and do that in Japan. Good morning from Celine and Norton in Oxfordshire. Hello to you. Oh yes, there's another question that's really good question. What woods are poisonous apart from yew? Well, my rule, remember I'm coming from a UK perspective, my rule for any woods that you would use for any cooking utensils or anything you might eat with, like chopping boards, spoons, tongs, that kind of thing, definitely avoid yew. Now yew is a tree in the UK that's very poisonous, and it's got little red, they're called berries by a lot of people, but technically they're called an aril, but they have these, for want of a better word, little red berries, and the tree has got needles like a pine tree, but it's very different to a pine tree, and that wood you definitely want to avoid because that's yew. But other poisonous woods that you normally want to avoid, it's things like with waxy leaves. So that's another really good rule. So anything that has thick and waxy leaves, and that's things like rhododendron or laurel. Those woods tend to be a little bit toxic. Sometimes once they're dry they're okay, but I usually say to people definitely avoid them. But other than that, we're quite lucky in the UK. We don't have too many woods that would cause you too much trouble if you were to make a spoon out of them. So yew, anything with waxy leaves, and that'll keep you nice and safe. Also, we tend not to use coniferous woods for eating utensils. Things like pine, spruce, firs, larches, cedars even. Normally not because they're poisonous, but because they have a really strong flavour. Sometimes you make a spoon from a piece of pine, it tastes like eating Christmas trees, and you don't want that. And there's a question from Darth Kevin, I think. I can't really read that. How would you recommend the machete in the Ben Orford shop? Well, this just because you've asked that question a few times, I'll answer it, but I'm not really in the business of promoting stuff on these videos. It's not really what they're about. But yeah, Ben Orford's a friend of mine and he makes excellent tools, so I would say that anything he makes on his website is going to be good quality. Okay, so I think I will call it a day there. So thanks for joining me. Remember to tune in with Ed on Wednesday at 10 o'clock. Stay tuned to our Instagram channel for what he's going to be doing and what you'll need to join in. And thanks very much for joining me. Okay,